Hi, this is Christina at Cemetery of Choice. Today we have a very sad situation in Pittsburgh ending in a self-induced abortion death. We have a lot of other tragedies to look at today, starting with very scanty information in Chicago in 1918 and 1925. On August 29th of 1918, a 23-year-old homemaker named Mabel died at Cook County Hospital of blood poisoning. Now, two doctors were implicated in her death. Dr. Nathan Smedley, who from all appearances seemed to be a fairly respectable guy, and a Dr. Emma Warren, who was implicated in other abortions. They were arrested and arraigned, but I can't tell that the case ever went to trial. Like, share, subscribe. I want to go to Chicago and look at these documents. We cannot learn from things if we don't know what happened. Then on August 29th of 1925, a woman who, judging by her name, was a Polish immigrant, and I'm going to have to anglicize her name or I'm not going to be able to pronounce it, Katerina. She was 31 or 32. She died at Chicago's St. Mary's Hospital from an abortion that the Homicide Chicago Interactive Database says was performed that day. But if you follow my channel, you know that the Homicide in Chicago Interactive Database is not the most accurate source of information. Gives you good starting points, but you really need to move forward from there. Now, a woman whose name is spelled a couple of different ways and who was identified as a nurse or a midwife was held by the coroner on August 31st. And she was apparently not indicted until July of 1927. Like, share, subscribe. What the hell? What's going on? So I wish I knew more about how these young women wind up coming to their deaths. Now, I do have a lot more information about this really sad situation in Pittsburgh in 1926. And I have to go back to Pittsburgh because of what's been dubbed the beer bug. The archives in Pittsburgh are closed to the public right now. I went up there, I took notes, but because camera phones weren't a thing at the time, I did not get pictures of the documents so that I could show you my sources. You're just having to trust me that I looked at my notes. And I do have Myrtle's death certificate. If you scroll down on the blog post, you'll find it. And of course, I'm sharing it. Which direction? Here. Myrtle Shaw was 22 years old. And on Wednesday, August 18th, 1926, her friends and fiance, Bruce Armstrong, brought her to West Penn Hospital in Pittsburgh. She'd been feverish and in pain for the last 3 weeks, and now she was in shock. Now, Bruce said he'd known Myrtle for 6 or 7 years, and he said he'd only known that she was ill but didn't know why. Her mother, Alice Phillips, was able to tell the doctor more. She said that Myrtle had attempted a self-induced abortion when her period had been 2 weeks late. At first, Myrtle took vaginal bleeding as a good sign the abortion was actually working, but the bleeding just continued. She developed fever, she developed pain, and that's when her family and friends became really concerned. By the time they got her to the hospital, she was vomiting, weak, and anemic with a rapid pulse and respiration and an alarming blood pressure of 136/10. In spite of the doctor's best efforts, Myrtle died at 8:15 p.m. on August 29th. Now, her death certificate indicates that she was married to John Shaw at the time of her death. But Bruce, the fiancé, was the source of information, and Myrtle was buried under her maiden name. And what this seems to indicate to me is that Myrtle and her husband were probably estranged, and she was probably waiting for a divorce to go through so that she and Bruce could be married. This young woman evidently had led a very sad life. Now we move ahead to Chicago, where I got my first lead from the Homicide in Chicago Interactive Database. That's where it's really useful. And I found some new articles recently. In August of 1927, a 15-year-old girl named Florence Cruz, who was a junior at Lindblom High School, confessed to her parents that she was pregnant. Now, an insurance adjuster in his early 20s, one source said he was 22, one said he was 25, promised to marry Florence Then he disappeared, telling his landlady that he was going to California. Now, the poor abandoned Florence was disconsolate. She started threatening suicide. So her parents, Louis and Amanda, reached out to 71-year-old Dr. James Aldrich. And according to the parents' testimony at the inquest, Mr. and Mrs. Cruz took Florence to Aldrich's office at 5641 Normal Boulevard on August 19th. And after the abortion, Florence remained there at Aldrich's practice, being attended by his elderly wife. Her condition deteriorated, and she was finally taken to Augustana Hospital about a week after the abortion. The doctors who treated her there reported the case to the coroner, who immediately began an investigation, and a deputy spoke to Florence's father, who evidently came clean about everything. Florence died on August 29th. The deputy coroner conducted an inquest at the undertaking establishment, and then after the funeral, he had the parents charge as accessories both before and after the fact. Mrs. Cruz wasn't home when the police went to arrest her. She was reportedly ill at another location. They did manage to get hold of Mr. Cruz. Evidently, he wasn't able to raise the $5,000 bond. He sat in a jail cell threatening violence against Lynch. He said he was going to kill him if he ever got hold of him. So now the three parties in Chicago, the doctor and the parents, were released after the coroner's jury was, for some reason, like, share, subscribe. I want to go to Chicago and figure this out. They were unable to confirm that Aldrich had performed the abortion, but the coroner recommended that Lynch be charged with murder. You see how something weird's going on there? I mean, she was there. Her parents said they brought her there, but they let the doctor go, and they are charging Lynch. Were they asserting that Lynch perpetrated the abortion and then fled? Like, share, subscribe. I want to know. And that's all I've been able to understand. Now, we're going to stay in Chicago and jump ahead to 1987, when abortion is safe and legal and nothing can go wrong. Everything is sunshine and unicorns, unless you are 27-year-old Diane. She went to Head Surgery Center, HEDD, for a safe and legal abortion on August 29th. Now, although she was over 12 weeks pregnant, which meant that, according to the law at the time, the abortion needed to be performed in a hospital, not an outpatient setting, Dr. Rudolph Moran, M-O-R-A-G-N-E, if you have a clue how to pronounce that, please comment. He proceeded with the abortion. But he ended up hitting a vein when he was injecting her with anesthetic. And Diane started having seizures and went into cardiac arrest. They had no idea how to resuscitate her, and they had no equipment to resuscitate her. So all of the physicians present, Moraine, Harry Pimentel, his wife Esther Pimentel, and Dr. Calvin Williams failed to perform CPR. They did diddly squat. Gosh, I wonder if we've seen that happen at other abortion clinics. I'll give you a clue. Yes! Oh my God, the number of clinics where nobody on staff is qualified to perform CPR would make your hair curl. I run into it again and again and again and again, and the abortion lobby assures us that, lo, Roe versus Wade came in its sunshine and unicorns and safety and never any quackery anymore, ever. It's just beautiful. No, it's not. These people are quacks. At any rate, just to add some insult to injury, the autopsy report did attribute her death to seizures due to anesthesia during the abortion and made note of the recent pregnancy, but her death certificate not only doesn't mention the abortion, but marked no in the box about whether the patient had been pregnant in the previous 3 months. This is one of the things I talk about where we don't have an accurate count of safe and legal abortion deaths. It is far, far easier to hide statistically that this was a safe and legal abortion death than it was to hide criminally a criminal abortion death. Killing a woman in a criminal abortion, you just heard me talk about it. Indicted for murder, indicted for murder, indicted for murder. It wasn't just malpractice. Your butt was seriously on the line. And people could be charged as accessories for covering up for you. This wasn't something where you just, we're just gonna. You needed a lot of pull and a lot of money for bribes if you thought you were going to get away with that. And I've covered that in other cases. But the way abortion deaths, the CDC pretends that they know. They go, oh, it's safer than this, it's safer than that, it's safer than a shot of penicillin, it's 17 times safer than childbirth, or 14 times, or whatever the number is they claim. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the way abortion deaths are counted from the safe legal variety is if the abortion is coded on the death certificate in such a way that it will show up in the computer as an abortion death and not as any of the related things, infection, therapeutic misadventure, cardiac arrest, blah, 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 blah. And if the death is one of the ones abstracted and sent to the National Center for Health Statistics, then the National Center for Health Statistics will notify the CDC. But that's only if a death happens to show up. The death has to be coded so that it will show up, and it has to be the one of the sample of death certificates sent to the NCHS. Okay? So claiming that from this data collection method, you know how many abortion deaths there are, that is like taking a bushel basket and putting it under an apple tree, and then you count how many apples fell into the basket and say, this is how many apples fell from this apple tree. Well, no, it's how many landed in the basket, not how many fell from the tree. And yeah, somebody might walk past, pick up an apple, and chuck it into the basket, just like sometimes people report abortion deaths. Maybe. Can you see how this is not going to count them all? We had one case where I know they didn't count her. Her name was Latachi. She died in Texas. And the abortionist who performed the fatal abortion talked about her death at a National Abortion Federation event that was being attended by 2 CDC professionals. And he's talking about this girl's death, right? 17-year-old girl bleeds to death. He talks about it. They counted 0 deaths in her age range and race in the entire United States for that year. Her death could not have been any more obvious if she had crawled to Atlanta and expired on the floor of Lisa Coonan's office with her aftercare instructions clutched in her hand, and they didn't even bother to give her the dignity of counting her as a statistic. So when they tell you how many women die from safe legal abortions, they don't have a clue. They're looking in the bushel basket. They are not looking on the ground under the tree. And let me tell you, they're being very careful not to look on the ground under the tree. Well, let's get back to Diane. A doctor reviewing the case did say that Moran and head staff deviated from the accepted standards from care. Well, do you think? And the state health department had already been investigating the clinic for numerous deficiencies. Pimentel ended up paying out $1.8 million in 6 malpractice suits, including a $500,000 settlement to Diane's family. And another abortion patient also bled to death when Moran failed to diagnose her ectopic pregnancy when she had come to him at head for a safe and legal abortion. Pimentel's license was finally suspended in 1990 for fraudulent insurance billing. He had already been banned from the state's Medicaid program for grossly inferior care, and the clinic's license was finally, a day late and $1 short, revoked in 91 because of problems with sanitation and infection control, including mold on the breathing tubes and mouse droppings in the operating room. Safe and legal, sunshine and unicorns. Yeah, by all means, trust what the mainstream media tells you about how abortion is actually practiced in America.